After 2 years of a secret and intense romance, Monica Sterling confessed her deepest pain, her inability to carry a child. On her 42nd birthday, I gave her the only thing money couldn't buy, my offer to be the surrogate for her frozen eggs. We left off with Monica sobbing in my arms, holding on to a fragile hope. Now see what happens when that hope meets reality. The silence that followed my offer was heavier than any boardroom tension I had ever witnessed. Monica pulled back just enough to look at me, her face wet with tears, her eyes searching mine for a crack in my resolve. She didn't say yes immediately. Instead, her CEO instincts kicked in, the need to analyze the risk, to protect the asset, which in this case was me. "Lily, you don't understand what you're saying," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Pregnancy changes everything. Your body, your career, your freedom. You're 23. You should be traveling, not swelling up with my baggage." "I'm not offering to carry your baggage, Mon. I'm offering to carry our future," I said, holding her gaze steadily. I knew she was terrified of taking advantage of me, of the power dynamic that had once defined us. "I've thought about this. I've read the books. I've talked to the doctors. I love you, and I know that somewhere in a freezer uptown, there are pieces of you waiting to wake up. I want to be the one to wake them." She closed her eyes, a tear tracking through her perfect foundation. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind howling outside the penthouse. Then, she let out a shuddering breath and rested her forehead against mine. If we do this, I will spend every day of my life trying to be worthy of it," she vowed, her voice fierce and low. "You will never be alone in this. Not for a second." It was the acceptance of a lifetime contract, signed not with ink, but with a desperate, hopeful kiss. The following weeks were a whirlwind of medical appointments that transformed our romance into a mission. The fertility clinic became our second home, a place of sterile white walls and hushed voices. Monica, usually the one commanding rooms and barking orders, became strangely quiet in front of the doctors. She held my hand so tight during the consultations that her knuckles turned white, listening to the risks and the protocols with an intensity that scared me a little. She wasn't the boss here. She was a woman terrifyingly aware that her happiness was in the hands of biology. We started the hormone injections on a rainy Tuesday. The doctor had explained that my body needed to be prepared to accept the embryo, which meant weeks of daily shots in my stomach or thigh. I sat on the edge of our bed, watching Monica organize the vials and needles on the nightstand with surgical precision. Her hands, usually so steady when signing multi-million-dollar contracts, were shaking slightly. "I can't believe I have to hurt you to do this," she murmured, flicking the syringe to remove the air bubbles. She looked pale, as if she were the one about to be pricked. She knelt between my legs on the floor, looking up at me with eyes full of apology. "Tell me if it burns. Tell me to stop." "Just do it, Mon," I said softly, running my fingers through her hair. "It's just a pinch. Think about why we're doing it." She nodded, took a deep breath, and pressed the needle into my skin. She didn't look away, but I saw her jaw clench. When it was over, she kissed the tiny red spot on my stomach with a reverence that made my heart ache. "I'm sorry," she whispered against my skin. "Thank you." That night marked a shift in our dynamic that I hadn't expected. The Ice Queen melted completely, replaced by a hovering, overprotective caretaker. Monica began treating me like I was made of spun glass. She took over all the cooking, researching nutrient-dense meals for optimal uterine lining and banning caffeine from the house. She monitored my sleep, adjusted the thermostat if I so much as shivered, and practically carried me to the car in the mornings. It was stifling at times, but also overwhelmingly sweet. I saw it for what it was. Her way of participating in a pregnancy she couldn't physically carry. She couldn't feel the nausea or the cramps the hormones gave me, so she tried to control everything else. One evening, I found her reading a book on prenatal development, her glasses perched on her nose, looking more focused than she ever did reading a financial report. "Did you know the baby can hear us at 16 weeks?" she asked, looking up with a wonder I had never seen before. "We aren't even pregnant yet, Mon," I laughed, taking the book from her hands. "Let's get through the transfer first." But seeing the hope in her eyes made the bloating and the mood swings worth it. She was already a mother. She just needed a child to pour all that love into. I was the vessel, yes, but she was the anchor. The day of the transfer arrived with a cold, bright sun over Manhattan. We drove to the clinic in silence, the weight of the moment pressing down on us. This was it. One of her frozen eggs, fertilized and waiting, was about to be placed inside me. It was science, yes, but it felt like magic. Monica held my hand as I lay on the table, her eyes locked on the monitor where a tiny flash of light represented our potential child. "That's it," the doctor said cheerfully, stripping off his gloves. "Now, we wait." The 2-week wait sounded harmless, but I knew it would be torture. Monica squeezed my hand, leaning down to kiss my forehead, her mask hiding her expression, but I could feel her trembling. We were walking out of there with a secret passenger, or just a ghost. Back home, Monica tucked me into bed in the middle of the afternoon, insisting on absolute rest. She sat beside me, stroking my hair, staring at my flat stomach with an intensity that could start a fire. "You're carrying my heart in there, Lily," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Be careful with it." I placed my hand over hers, pressing it against my skin. We were in the limbo between hope and heartbreak, and for the first time, the powerful Monica Sterling was utterly powerless. The 2 weeks that followed the transfer were the longest 14 days of my life. Time, which usually flew by in the chaotic rhythm of New York City, seemed to grind to a halt inside the penthouse. Every twinge in my abdomen, every wave of fatigue, every slightly strange taste in my mouth was analyzed, dissected, and Googled until 3 a.m. Monica was worse. She paced the living room like a caged tiger, checking her watch every 5 minutes as if she could speed up biology with sheer willpower. She stopped asking about my day and started asking about my uterus, her eyes scanning my body for any sign that the tiny spark of life she had entrusted to me was still burning. We had decided to take a home test before the official blood work at the clinic. It felt more intimate, a secret we could keep between the marble walls of our bathroom before the doctors turned it into a medical statistic. On the morning of the 14th day, I woke up before the alarm. The sky outside was a bruised purple, the sun not yet risen over the river. Monica was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed with her back to me, her silhouette rigid against the gray light. She wasn't moving, and I knew she was terrified that this was the end of the road. "It's time," I whispered, reaching out to touch her shoulder. She flinched, then turned to me. Her face was pale, stripped of the invincible CEO mask she wore for the world. In that moment, she looked just like any woman afraid of having her heart broken. She nodded without speaking, interlacing her fingers with mine, her grip so tight it almost hurt. We walked into the bathroom together, the cold tiles sending shivers up my legs that had nothing to do with the temperature. The process was unglamorous and nerve-wracking. I did what I had to do with the plastic stick while Monica stood by the sink, staring at her own reflection as if she didn't recognize herself. When I set the test on the counter, face down, the silence in the room became deafening. The box said to wait 3 minutes. 3 minutes to decide if we were a family or just 2 women with a broken dream. Monica refused to look at the timer on her phone. She just stared at the white stick as if it were a bomb. "If it's negative," she started, her voice cracking, unable to finish the sentence. "We try again," I said firmly, though my own heart was hammering against my ribs. "We don't stop, Mon. We're in this." She looked at me then, her eyes swimming with unshed tears. "I don't know if I can survive hope twice, Lily," The vulnerability in her voice broke me. This wasn't just about a baby. It was about redemption for the decade she spent choosing work over life. It was about proving that she wasn't as cold and barren as the world, and perhaps she herself believed. The alarm on her phone chirped, a cheerful, jarring sound that made us both jump. Monica froze. She couldn't do it. She couldn't turn it over. She backed away until her back hit the tiled wall, shaking her head. "You look," she whispered. "Please, I can't." My hands were trembling as I reached for the test. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of her expensive lavender soap that filled the room, and flipped the plastic stick. The 2 pink lines were dark, bold, and unmistakable. I blinked, thinking I was hallucinating, but they didn't fade. Positive. Pregnant. "Mon," I choked out, tears instantly blurring my vision. I didn't need to say anything else. The tone of my voice was enough. Monica let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh, and pushed off the wall. She crossed the distance between us in 2 strides, looking at the test in my hand as if it were a holy relic. When she saw the lines, her knees literally gave out. She sank to the floor, dragging me down with her, burying her face in my stomach. She wrapped her arms around my waist, holding on for dear life, shaking with silent, racking sobs. "You're here," she whispered into my shirt, talking to the microscopic life inside me. "You're actually here." I stroked her hair, feeling the wetness of her tears soaking through the fabric. It was the most intimate moment of my life, far surpassing any night in bed. We were 3 people in that bathroom floor, bound together by science and a reckless amount of love. Later that morning, the sun finally broke through the clouds, flooding the penthouse with golden light. The mood had shifted from funeral solemnity to a fragile, giddy joy. Monica wouldn't let me lift a finger. She made me breakfast in bed, burnt toast and overly sweet tea, and watched me eat it like I was performing a miracle. She kept touching my stomach, her hand hovering over the flat surface, a look of awe on her face that made her look 10 years younger. "I'm going to protect you," she vowed, kissing my forehead as she got ready for work. "Both of you. Nothing touches this family, I promise." She left for the office with a spring in her step I hadn't seen in years, leaving me in a bubble of happiness that felt impenetrable. But bubbles are fragile things. Around noon, while I was reading on the sofa, Monica's personal cell phone, which she had left on the kitchen counter in her excitement, began to buzz. I glanced at it, expecting a call from the clinic confirming our blood work, but the name flashing on the screen wasn't a doctor. It was Richard. I stared at the name, a cold dread pooling in my stomach. I knew who he was, her ex-husband, the man who hadn't called in 3 years. I didn't answer, but as the phone vibrated against the marble, rattling like a warning, I knew the outside world was coming to test the promise Monica had made. The vibration of the phone against the marble counter sounded like a drill boring into the fragile piece we had built. I stared at the screen, the name Richard flashing like a warning sign, and felt a cold knot of dread tighten in my stomach. It had been 2 weeks since the positive test. 2 weeks of living in a soft, sun-drenched bubble where nothing existed but Monica, me, and the tiny secret growing inside. But looking at that name, I was violently reminded that the world outside, the world of sharks and mergers, was still waiting to swallow us whole. I didn't touch the phone, but the screen lit up with a preview of a text message before going dark again. "Stop dodging my calls, Monica. The European merger requires a united front. We need to talk about us." The words burned themselves into my retinas. United front. Us. He wasn't just an ex-husband reaching out for closure. He was a businessman coming to collect an asset he thought he still owned. He didn't know about me. He didn't know about the baby. To him, Monica was just a chess piece that had temporarily fallen off the board. For hours, I sat on the sofa, clutching a book I couldn't read, guarding the phone as if it were a bomb. My mind raced with insecurities I thought I had buried. Richard was powerful, wealthy, and age-appropriate. He was the kind of man who looked right standing next to Monica at galas. I was 23, a former intern, carrying a child in secret. If this merger was as important as the news said it was, would Monica be tempted to play the part of the happy wife again to save her empire? The hormones made the fear irrational and overwhelming. When the elevator doors opened that evening, Monica walked in looking radiant, carrying a bag from a high-end baby boutique. "I know it's early," she announced, pulling out a tiny, ridiculously soft cashmere blanket. "But I couldn't resist the texture. It's perfect for sensitive skin." She stopped when she saw my face. The smile slid off her lips instantly, replaced by the sharp, analytical look of the CEO. "What happened? Is it the baby?" "No, the baby is fine," I said quickly, seeing the panic flare in her eyes. I stood up and pointed to the kitchen island. "You left your personal phone. It hasn't stopped ringing." Monica walked over to the counter, her heels clicking a slow, ominous rhythm on the floor. She picked up the device, her expression darkening as she scrolled through the missed calls and messages. The softness she had carried through the door evaporated, replaced by the icy demeanor that terrified boardrooms. "Richard!" She spat the name like a curse. "He smells money. The deal in London is stalling, and he thinks playing the power couple card will close it. He says you need a united front," I whispered, wrapping my arms around myself. "He thinks you're still available." Monica looked up from the screen, her eyes blazing with a cold fury I had never seen directed at me. "He thinks he can snap his fingers and I'll fall back into line for the sake of a stock price. He doesn't know who I am anymore. He remembers the woman who cared about optics. He doesn't know the woman who is about to be a mother." "But the merger," I started, the voice of the sensible intern creeping in. "If it fails, the board will be furious. They might come after you." Monica crossed the room and knelt in front of me, taking my hands in hers. Her grip was ironclad. "Let them come. I built that company from the ground up, but I would burn it to the ground before I let that man think he has a place in my life again." She pressed a kiss to my knuckles, her eyes softening only for me. "You are my united front, Lily. You and this baby. Richard is a ghost." As if summoned by her anger, the phone began to buzz again on the cushion beside us. It was him, persistent, arrogant, refusing to take silence for an answer. The sound was grating, an invasion of our sanctuary. I saw Monica's jaw clench. She wasn't just annoyed. She was protective. He was stressing me out, and by extension, he was stressing the pregnancy. That was the one line nobody was allowed to cross. "He's not going to stop until he hears what he wants to hear," I said quietly, feeling the tension radiating off her. Monica stood up slowly, picking up the phone. She didn't swipe to answer the call. Instead, she stared at the screen until it stopped ringing, then opened the messaging app. "You're right," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "He needs to hear something, but it won't be what he wants." She held the phone up, her thumb hovering over the microphone icon to record a voice message. The air in the penthouse crackled with electricity. She wasn't going to negotiate. She wasn't going to be polite. She looked at me, gave me a reassuring nod, and then pressed the button. I held my breath, knowing that whatever she was about to say would change everything. The secret was about to end. I watched Monica's thumb press down on the microphone icon, her knuckles white with the force of her grip. The penthouse was so quiet, I could hear the wind rattling the window panes, a stark contrast to the storm brewing in her eyes. She didn't shout. In fact, her voice was dangerously low, vibrating with a cold, steely finality that sent shivers down my spine. She stared at the wall, but I knew she was visualizing Richard's arrogant face. Listen to me closely because I am only going to say this once, she began, her tone clipping every syllable like a wire cutter. I don't care about the European deal, and I certainly don't care about your optics. Stop calling me. Stop sending flowers to my office. There is no us to resurrect for the cameras. She paused, taking a sharp breath, and then her eyes flicked to me. Her expression softened instantly, melting from ice to something terrifyingly vulnerable. I am not the woman you remember, Richard, she continued, her voice trembling slightly now, but not with fear. I'm not available. I am in love, deeply, madly in love. And I am married to the person who actually holds my heart. So do not contact me again, or my lawyers will file a harassment suit faster than you can blink. Goodbye. She lifted her thumb, sending the message with a swipe that felt like a guillotine dropping. The swoosh sound of the sent audio echoed in the room, followed by a suffocating silence. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might bruise my ribs. Married? The word hung in the air between us, heavy and electric. She had lied to him. She had lied to the most powerful man in her past to protect me, to protect us. But hearing her say it out loud, even as a lie, did something to my chest that I couldn't explain. Mon, I whispered, my voice barely working. You told him we were married. He's going to check public records. He's going to know it's a lie. I was terrified of the backlash, of the press digging into her life to find this mysterious spouse, exposing our fragile secret before the baby was even safe. Monica placed the phone face down on the coffee table as if it were a contaminated object. She turned to me, her blue eyes blazing with an intensity that pinned me to the sofa. Let him check, she said defiantly. Then she moved toward me, not walking, but gravitating, as if I were the only solid thing in her universe. She dropped to her knees on the rug between my legs, ignoring her expensive silk trousers, and took my hands in hers. It wasn't a lie, Lily, she said, her voice raw and stripped of all pretense. I didn't say it to trick him. I said it because the moment the words left my mouth, I realized they were the only true thing I've said in 10 years. She squeezed my hands, her thumbs tracing the pulse points on my wrists. I am married to you in every way that matters. My heart is yours. My home is yours. This baby is ours. I stared at her, tears blurring my vision. The woman who commanded skyscrapers and terrified boardrooms was kneeling on her living room floor, looking at me like I was the sun. But we aren't, I choked out, fear and hope warring in my throat. I'm just the intern you took a chance on. You are my life. She cut me off firmly. She released one of my hands and reached into the pocket of her robe. I expected a tissue, but she pulled out a simple silver band, her own mother's ring, the one she wore on a chain around her neck sometimes, hidden under her blouses. She fumbled with the clasp of the chain, her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped it. I was going to wait, she confessed, her eyes wet with tears. I was going to plan something big, Paris, Tokyo, something worthy of you, but I can't wait. Not after today. Not when I know that protecting you is the only job I ever want to have. She held the ring up, the silver catching the dim light of the city she owned. Monica, I gasped, my hands flying to my mouth. I don't want to lie to Richard, she whispered, leaning her forehead against mine. I want to make it the absolute truth. I want to bind you to me so tightly that no law, no merger, and no past can ever separate us. She pulled back just enough to look me in the eye. Her soul bared completely. Lily, will you marry me? Will you make me the honest woman I just claimed to be? The world stopped. The humming of the fridge, the wind outside, the fear of the future, it all vanished. There was only Victoria, asking me to be her equal, her partner, her wife. I didn't think about the age gap, or the money, or the scandal. I thought about the way she held my hair when I was sick, the way she looked at my stomach with awe, the way she made me feel seen in a world that looked through me. Yes, I sobbed, the word tearing out of my throat. Yes, Mon. 1,000 times yes. She didn't wait. She slid the ring onto my finger, her hands trembling, and then she buried her face in my lap, weeping with relief. I curled over her, holding the most powerful woman in New York as she fell apart in my arms, and for the first time, I didn't feel like an intern or a surrogate. I felt like a wife. Richard had wanted a united front. Well, he had just created an invincible one. The silver band on my finger felt heavier than it looked, a constant, cool reminder of the promise we had made on the living room rug. Richard never called back. The audio message Monica sent must have been the final nail in the coffin of his ego. Or perhaps he simply realized that fighting a woman who had found something worth dying for was a losing battle. His silence was the first wedding gift we received, and it brought a piece to the penthouse that we hadn't known was missing. The united front, he demanded, had crumbled, replaced by a fortress built of nursery rhymes and late-night cravings. As the weeks turned into months, my body became a public declaration of our secret. I was 7 months pregnant now, and there was no hiding the curve of my stomach under loose sweaters anymore. The baby was active, a little gymnast who seemed determined to reshape my ribs from the inside out. Monica was fascinated by every shift and ripple. The woman who used to track stock market fluctuations on her phone now spent her evenings tracking fetal movement patterns, her hand resting on my belly with a reverence that made my throat tight. The Ice Queen had officially melted, at least within the walls of our home. Monica would come home from Sterling Corp, the weight of the city still clinging to her gray suits, and the first thing she would do was drop to her knees in front of the sofa where I was resting. She would press her cheek against the stretched fabric of my shirt, closing her eyes as she whispered to the baby. She told her about the skyline, about the deals she closed, and about how much we were waiting to meet her. It was a side of her so soft, so unguarded, that I felt like I was witnessing a miracle every night at 6:30. We turned the guest room, a sterile white space that had never hosted a guest, into the nursery. Monica insisted on designing it herself, but instead of the sharp, modern lines I expected, she chose soft sage greens and warm oak wood. I watched her one Saturday, stripped down to a tank top and yoga pants, assembling a crib with a screwdriver in her hand and the instruction manual between her teeth. There was something incredibly sexy about seeing the CEO of a multinational conglomerate swearing at a stubborn screw, her hair messy, and her focus absolute. This instruction manual was clearly written by a sadist, she grumbled, wiping sweat from her forehead. You negotiated $1 billion merger last week, Mon. I think you can handle an IKEA crib, I teased, waddling over to hand her a glass of water. She looked up at me, taking the glass, and her expression softened instantly. She reached out to touch my stomach, a reflex she couldn't seem to control. Mergers are easy, Lily. Ensuring this place is perfect for her, this is terrifying. What if the crib isn't sturdy enough? What if the paint fumes are toxic? The anxiety in her eyes was real. She was battling the fear that she had started this journey too late, that she wouldn't be good enough. She's going to love it because you built it, I assured her, running my fingers through her damp hair. And because it's filled with love, not toxic fumes. I checked the paint brand 3 times, remember? Naming her was the only negotiation we couldn't close. Monica wanted something strong, a name that would look good on a letterhead. Eleanor, Margaret, Catherine. I wanted something softer, something that reflected the light she brought into our lives. We spent hours debating, tossing names back and forth like tennis balls, but nothing stuck. We'll know when we see her, Monica finally decided, kissing my nose. She'll tell us who she is. Our intimacy changed too. It wasn't just about passion anymore. It was about a deep, anchoring connection. Monica treated my changing body like a temple. She would rub almond oil into my skin to prevent stretch marks, her touch slow and methodical, treating every inch of me as precious. We made love differently, slower, with more eye contact, navigating the new shape of us with a tenderness that felt holy. I wasn't just her lover. I was the vessel of her legacy, and she worshipped me for it. The fear of the age gap, the fear of my past irrelevance, all of it faded into the background. I felt powerful. I was growing a life. I was the calm center of Monica Sterling's universe. When we lay in bed at night, her arm thrown protectively over my waist, her hand cupping the baby, I knew I belonged here. The imposter syndrome that had plagued me since my internship was gone, replaced by the fierce instinct of a mother-to-be. One rainy afternoon, as we sat watching the storm roll over Central Park, the baby gave a particularly strong kick that made Monica jump. She laughed, a bright, genuine sound that filled the room. "She's got your spirit," Monica said, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "She's not going to take orders from anyone, not even me." "Good," I smiled, leaning my head on her shoulder. "One boss in the family is enough." We were ready. The bag was packed by the door. The car seat was installed. The nursery was waiting. We existed in a sweet, suspended moment of perfection, safe in our high tower, believing we had thought of everything. But as I watched the lightning flash across the sky, I felt a strange tightening in my lower back, a dull ache that didn't feel like the usual pregnancy pain. I rubbed it absent-mindedly, ignoring the clock that had just started ticking down faster than we expected. Nature, unlike the board of directors, didn't care about our schedule. The 9th month of pregnancy was a paradox. Time seemed to stop completely, yet every second felt like a countdown to a bomb detonation. I was huge, breathless, and perpetually uncomfortable. My body stretched to its absolute limit to accommodate the life we had made. But while my ankles swelled and my back ached with a dull, constant throb, my heart had never felt lighter. For the first time in the history of Sterling Corp., the CEO's office was empty. Monica had done the unthinkable. She had taken a leave of absence. The board of directors had nearly swallowed their tongues when she announced it, but Monica didn't care. She traded power suits for cashmere joggers and board meetings for rubbing my swollen feet. The woman who used to schedule her life in 15-minute increments now spent hours just sitting on the floor with me, assembling complex Lego sets or reading poetry out loud to my belly. It was a surrender of control that proved, more than any ring or document, where her true loyalty lay. Our world shrank to the perimeter of the penthouse, a cozy, sun-drenched bubble floating above the chaotic city. Monica became my shadow, a vigilant guardian who anticipated my needs before I even voiced them. If I shifted uncomfortably on the sofa, a pillow appeared behind my back. If I licked my dry lips, a glass of ice water was placed in my hand. It wasn't just anxiety or micromanagement. It was an act of devotion, a way for her to physically participate in the labor her body couldn't perform. One evening, after a particularly long day where gravity felt like my personal enemy, Monica insisted on drawing me a bath. She filled the massive tub with warm water and lavender salts, the scent filling the bathroom with a calming haze. I felt self-conscious as I undressed, catching a glimpse of my reflection in the mirror, stretch marks mapping my skin like lightning bolts, my belly protruding like a globe. I felt less like a wife and more like a vessel, a temporary container for the air she wanted. "Stop that." Monica's voice cut through my thoughts, soft but firm. She was sitting on the edge of the tub, sleeves rolled up, watching me with an intensity that made my knees weak. "I can hear you thinking, Lily. You're judging yourself for doing the most miraculous thing a human body can do." "I just feel enormous," I admitted, lowering myself into the water with a groan of relief. "I don't feel like the girl you fell in love with. I feel like a science experiment." Monica didn't answer immediately. She dipped a sponge into the warm water and began to wash my back, her touch gentle and rhythmic. "You aren't the girl I fell in love with," she whispered against my wet shoulder. "You're the woman who is giving me a future, and you have never, ever looked more beautiful to me than you do right now." She kissed the damp skin of my neck, a lingering, possessive press of her lips that chased away every insecurity I had. The intimacy of those final weeks was different from the fire of our early days. It was slower, deeper, anchored in a profound trust. We spent hours lying in bed, her hand resting on the baby, feeling the hiccups and the rolls that rippled across my skin. She would talk to her, telling the baby about the empire waiting for her, but mostly about how much she was already loved. I realized then that Monica wasn't just waiting for an heir. She was waiting for a daughter. The business legacy didn't matter anymore. The human legacy did. "Do you think she'll have your eyes?" I asked one night, the city lights casting long shadows across the duvet. "I hope she has your heart," Monica replied instantly, her thumb tracing the line of my jaw. "My eyes see flaws and margins. Your heart sees people. She needs that." It was the highest compliment she could give, an admission that she wanted our child to be softer than the world that had forged her. The bag was packed by the door, a tangible symbol of the go time that hovered over us. Every time we walked past it, a jolt of electricity went through the room. We were ready, technically. The nursery was perfect, the car seat was installed, the doctor was on speed dial, but emotionally, we were standing on the edge of a cliff, holding hands, waiting to jump into a freefall we couldn't control. On the last Friday of the month, a heavy storm battered New York, turning the sky a bruised purple. We were watching a movie, curled up together on the oversized sofa, trying to ignore the thunder. I felt strange all day, a restlessness I couldn't shake, a pressure low in my pelvis that made it hard to sit still. I kept shifting, trying to find a comfortable position, but nothing worked. Monica noticed, of course. Her eyes kept darting to my face, reading my grimaces like a ticker tape. "Are you okay?" she asked for the 10th time, pausing the movie. "I'm fine, just tight," I said, trying to laugh it off. I went to stand up, intending to get another glass of water to distract myself. But as I rose, I felt a strange, distinct pop inside me, followed immediately by a gush of warm liquid soaking my leggings. I froze, staring down at the puddle forming on the expensive Persian rug. Monica followed my gaze, and for the first time in her life, the great CEO looked completely paralyzed. Her eyes went wide, her face draining of color. "Mon," I said, my voice surprisingly calm amidst the sudden chaos of my body. "Don't panic, but I think you need to get the bag. It's time." The drive to Mount Sinai Hospital was a blur of rain-slicked streets and Monica driving her sleek black sedan like a getaway car. The woman who usually sat in the back seat reviewing contracts was now gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity, weaving through New York traffic with a terrifying precision. Every time I groaned through a contraction, she flinched as if she were the one in pain, whispering reassurances that sounded more like desperate prayers. By the time we skidded into the emergency bay, her pristine cashmere joggers were soaked from the rain, and her carefully constructed composure was hanging by a thread. The hours that followed bled into one another, a haze of bright fluorescent lights, beeping monitors, and pain that felt like it was ripping me apart from the inside out. Labor wasn't the dignified cinematic event I had imagined. It was raw, messy, and primal. I lost track of time, drifting in and out of awareness, anchored only by the crushing grip of Monica's hand in mine. She never left my side, not for a second. She wiped my forehead with cool cloths, fed me ice chips, and barked orders at the nurses whenever she felt they weren't moving fast enough. "You're doing great, Lily. You're the strongest person I know," she whispered into my ear during a particularly brutal wave of pressure. Her voice was shaking, betraying the terror she was trying to hide. Seeing the invincible Monica Sterling look so helpless, so human, gave me a strange surge of strength. I wasn't just doing this for me. I was doing it for the woman who had spent 40 years thinking this moment would never happen. I can't do it anymore, I sobbed at one point, exhaustion pulling me under. The pain was relentless, a tide that wouldn't recede. Mon, I can't. Yes, you can, she said fiercely, cupping my face and forcing me to look into her blue eyes. Look at me. We are doing this together. I am right here. I am holding you. She became my external lung, breathing with me, counting the seconds, her forehead pressed against mine. In that sterile room, stripped of her empire and her armor, she was simply a partner fighting for her family. Then came the moment the doctor told me to push. The room seemed to shrink until it was just me, Monica, and the terrifying, beautiful goal ahead. The physical exertion was overwhelming, a fire consuming every muscle in my body. I squeezed Monica's hand so hard I thought I might break her fingers, but she didn't flinch. She was murmuring words of encouragement, her eyes locked on mine, pouring every ounce of her will into me. One more, Lily. She's right there, Monica cried out, her voice cracking with an emotion I had never heard before. I can see her! With a final guttural scream that tore through the room, the pressure suddenly vanished, replaced by a wet, slippery warmth. The silence that followed lasted only a heartbeat, but it felt like an eternity. I held my breath, my heart stopping in my chest, waiting for the sound that would change our world. And then, it happened. A loud, indignant cry pierced the air, filling the room with the undeniable sound of life. I collapsed back against the pillows, sobbing with relief, my body trembling uncontrollably. Monica let out a gasp that sounded like a sob, her hands flying to her mouth as the doctor lifted our daughter into the air. She was perfect. A tiny, wriggling bundle of limbs, red-faced and screaming, covered in the evidence of her journey. The nurse quickly wiped her down and placed her directly on my chest. The feeling of her skin against mine was electric, a grounding weight that instantly erased the hours of agony. I looked down at her, stroking her damp hair, and then I looked up at Monica. The CEO of Sterling Corp was weeping openly, tears streaming down her face unchecked. She reached out with a trembling hand to touch the baby's tiny foot, looking at her with a reverence usually reserved for deities. She's beautiful, she choked out. The doctor handed Monica the surgical scissors. Dad usually does the honors, but... Mom? She smiled kindly. Monica took the scissors, her hands shaking. With a deep breath, she cut the cord, severing the physical link to me so our daughter could take her place in the world as her own person. It was the most important deal she had ever closed. Look at her eyes, I whispered, gently nudging the baby's cheek. Our daughter blinked, opening her eyes for the first time. They were a startling, deep blue, unmistakably sterling eyes, staring back at the woman who had given her half her genetics. But her nose, her mouth, the delicate shape of her face, that was all me. She was the perfect fusion of our love, a living testament to the risk we had taken. Monica leaned down, wrapping her arms around both of us, burying her face in the space between my neck and the baby's head. We stayed like that for a long time, just breathing, the three of us tangled together in a knot of exhaustion and pure, unadulterated joy. A nurse snapped a photo of us, me sweaty and exhausted, Monica with mascara running down her face, and the baby sleeping soundly between us. It wasn't a polished PR photo. It was real, it was messy, and it was the happiest moment of my life. The Caribbean sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in strokes of bruised purple and burning gold, a masterpiece that no money could buy. Standing here, digging my bare toes into the warm, white sand, I looked back at the girl who used to be invisible in the dusty archives of New York. It had been exactly 1 year since our daughter took her first breath. And today, on a private island miles away from boardrooms and stock markets, I was taking the final step to bind my soul to the woman who gave me everything. We didn't want a grand ballroom or 1,000 guests pretending to care about our happiness. We left the city and its noise behind for a secluded cove, where the only paparazzi were the seagulls diving for fish. There was just a simple driftwood arch woven with local white orchids, a quiet officiant, and the rhythmic sound of the waves crashing against the shore. Monica was standing there, waiting for me, looking not like a CEO, but like a goddess in a flowing silk dress that danced in the wind. She looked younger than she did the day we met in that freezing conference room. The sharp lines of stress around her eyes, carved by decades of ruthlessness, had been smoothed out by a year of lullabies and laughter. She was barefoot, her dark hair loose and wild with sea salt, watching me walk down this aisle of sand with an expression of such pure, unfiltered adoration that it stole the breath from my lungs. She wasn't the Ice Queen anymore. She was just Monica, my shelter, and my storm. But I wasn't walking alone. Toddling beside me, holding my hand with a grip surprisingly strong for a 1-year-old, was Eleanor. She was wearing a tiny white dress that matched ours, stumbling over the uneven sand with the determined, stubborn gait of a sterling. She had Monica's piercing blue eyes and my smile, a perfect living map of our love story navigating the beach one wobbly step at a time. Every step toward Monica felt like a victory lap against the odds. I remembered the fear of the early days, the secrecy, the nights I spent wondering if I was just a fleeting distraction for a powerful woman. Now, looking at the tears shining in her eyes as we drew closer, I knew I was never a distraction. I was the destination she had been driving toward her entire life without even knowing it. We reached the altar, and Monica dropped to one knee, not to propose this time, but to greet our daughter. Eleanor squealed with delight and threw her arms around Monica's neck, burying her face in the scent of sandalwood and ocean air. Monica kissed her chubby cheek, lingering for a moment to inhale the smell of her baby, before standing up to take my hands. Her palms were warm and trembling slightly, a rare crack in her composure that was just for me. I spent 40 years building skyscrapers, she began, her voice thick with emotion, fighting to be heard over the wind. I thought legacy was about steel, stone, and the name on a building. But looking at you two, I realize I was just building empty cages. You are my legacy, Lily. You and Eleanor. You are the only deal I ever want to close, every single day, for the rest of my life. I tried to speak, but the lump in my throat was massive, blocking the words. You saw me when I was invisible, I finally whispered, squeezing her hands to anchor myself. You gave me a voice, a home, and a family. I promised to love you through every storm, every merger, and every quiet Sunday morning. I promised to be the safe harbor you never had, and the home you always deserved. Eleanor, getting impatient with the speeches, tugged at the hem of Monica's dress, making us both laugh. The sound bubbled up, light and free, carried away by the breeze. Monica reached for the simple platinum bands resting on a shell held by the officiant. She slid the ring onto my finger, right next to the engagement ring, the cool metal feeling heavy and grounding, a circle with no beginning and no end. I pronounce you partners for life, the officiant said, smiling softly at the three of us. Monica didn't wait for permission. She pulled me close, her hand tangling in my wind-blown hair, and kissed me with a passion that rivaled our first night in the penthouse. But sweeter, it tasted of salt, champagne, and a forever that we had fought tooth and nail to secure. We broke the kiss only when we felt tiny hands tugging at our legs, demanding to be part of the moment. We scooped Eleanor up between us, creating a huddle of white fabric and skin against the backdrop of the dying sun. The light finally touched the water, extinguishing the day, but igniting the stars above us, mirroring the bruises and the triumphs that had brought us to this exact point in time. They say the skin has a memory, that it remembers every touch, every scar, and every kiss it has ever known. My skin remembers the cold air of the archives, the silk of her sheets, and the stretch of pregnancy. But mostly, it remembers the feeling of being loved by Monica Sterling. As the first star appeared over the ocean, I knew this wasn't the end of our story. It was just the beginning of our empire, not one made of money, but one made of us. Thank you so much for reading this journey of love, courage, and redemption. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like this video. Leave a comment with your thoughts on Monica and Lily's future, and subscribe to RP Forbidden Romances for more stories that break the rules. Until next time.